Afternoon at a massive resort construction site in the snowy peaks of Colorado. The air is freezing, and the work has ground to a halt because of a power failure. A massive industrial generator sits outside, silent, despite the best efforts of the primary technical team. Adrian Cole, a 43-year-old freelance electrician, walks in wearing an old jacket and carrying a simple toolkit. Sophie Lane, the 28-year-old CEO, watches him with doubt. "He's the backup?" she asks. She looks Adrian in the eye. "Fix the generator, or we're done here." Adrian replies, "Turn it on, but don't touch anything. Watch." Truth starts here. Adrian Cole was a man of steel, silence, and absolute rhythmic routine. At 43, his face was a map of quiet focus and the deep, enduring weariness of a man who worked with his hands to keep a small world safe. He was an industrial electrician, a master of the wire, who specialized in the high-voltage systems that powered the world's infrastructure. But in the high-stakes world of Colorado's luxury developments, Adrian was essentially invisible. He was a freelance contractor, the guy who picked up the short-term jobs that the big engineering firms didn't want or the ones they were too expensive to handle. He arrived at job sites in a 10-year-old pickup truck, wore a jacket that had seen better winters, and carried a toolkit that was scuffed and dented by decades of service. To the elite project managers and aggressive site directors, Adrian was a utility. They saw the silver in his hair and the calm in his eyes and assumed he lacked the hustle required for the modern industry. They didn't see the man who understood the harmonics of a magnetic field better than their computer models. They didn't see the man who had spent 15 years in the heart of the grid before the world got heavy. Adrian's life was defined by two things: precision and parenting. 5 years ago, his world had been surgically hollowed out when his wife Sarah passed away. In the aftermath of that loss, Adrian had systematically dismantled his old life as a lead supervisor for a national utility company. He had walked away from the high-salary corporate path because it required 60-hour work weeks and constant travel. He needed to be the father who was there for the science projects, the bad dreams, and the Saturday morning pancakes. He chose the flexible, often unstable life of a freelance technician because his 10-year-old daughter Nora's presence was a currency that no promotion could ever replace. Nora was his shadow. On days when school was closed or during the long summer breaks, she would sit in the passenger seat of his truck, reading books on architecture while her father solved the city's invisible problems. She knew her dad was special. She saw the way he could touch a vibrating motor and tell you exactly which bearing was failing. To the rest of the world, Adrian was just the backup electrician called in as a last resort. To Nora, he was the giant who kept the lights on for everyone else. On this particular afternoon, the construction of the Summit Peak Resort was in a terminal crisis. A massive specialized power generator, the heart of the entire site's electrical distribution, had seized up. The project was 2 weeks away from a major inspection, and every hour the machines weren't running was $100,000 in lost momentum. The primary engineering firm had sent their elite team, but they were currently standing in the snow, staring at their tablets in a state of clinical panic. They had followed every protocol in the manual, and the generator still refused to hold a charge. When Adrian arrived, the contrast was jarring. He stepped out of his truck, nodding to Nora, who stayed inside to finish her homework. He walked toward the group of engineers, his heavy boots sounding solid on the frozen ground. He didn't offer a handshake or a long explanation of his background. He simply looked at the massive, humming beast of a machine. Sophie Lane, the 28-year-old CEO of the project, was standing nearby. She was a woman of logic, data, and absolute icy focus. She had inherited her father's vision for the resort, and she had no patience for friction. She looked at Adrian's worn jacket, the simple steel box he carried, and the quiet way he stood. To her, he looked like a relic of a dying era. "He's the backup?" Sophia asked her manager, her voice like a shard of glass. The manager nodded, his face flushed from the cold. "The only one available on such short notice, ma'am. The firms in Denver are all booked for the storm prep." Sophia stepped toward Adrian, effectively breaking the circle of her experts. She looked him from head to toe, her eyes scanning for a badge or a title she recognized. She found neither. "My engineers have been at this for 6 hours," Sophia said, her tone an ultimatum. "They've checked the fuel injectors, the primary coils, and the digital logic gates. They tell me the system is fried. If you can't fix it, I'm shutting down the site and firing the contractor. Fix the generator, Adrian, or we're done here." It wasn't a request, it was a test. Adrian didn't react to the pressure. He had been in high-voltage substations where one wrong move meant total darkness. A CEO's threat was just static on the line. He looked at the machine, and then back at Sophia. "Turn it on," Adrian said, "but don't touch anything else. Don't reset the board. Don't clear the cache. Just let it run raw." One of the junior engineers scoffed. "We've tried that already, pal. The emergency shutoff triggers every time the load shifts. It's a systemic logic failure." Adrian shook his head slowly, his hazel eyes fixed on the generator's vibration. "Not like this. You're trying to silence the error before you understand what the machine is trying to tell you. Let it run." The air of the site shifted. The experts looked at each other, waiting for Sophia to dismiss the old guy. But Sophia, desperate for any result that wasn't a total failure, signaled to her team. "Do it, run it raw." In the real world, the person who is most expendable is often the one who actually understands the foundation. We value hustle and credentials, but machines don't read resumes. They only respond to the people who are quiet enough to hear the truth hidden beneath the noise. Position doesn't reflect skill. It only reflects a seat. The silence of the construction site was shattered by the rhythmic, mechanical groan of the generator as it struggled to life. The exhaust belched a thick plume of white vapor into the Colorado air. The elite engineering team stood in a semicircle, their arms crossed over their designer jackets, clutching their tablets like shields. They were waiting for the inevitable. They wanted to see the red warning lights flash so they could go back to blaming the hardware and protect their own reputations. "See?" the lead engineer shouted over the noise. "The primary phase is already lagging. The computer is going to kill the circuit in 10 seconds. It's a junk pile, Sophia. We need a full replacement." Adrian didn't look at the engineers. He didn't even look at the digital dashboard. He was standing 3 feet from the main housing, his head tilted to the side, his eyes closed. He was performing a tactical observation, a technique he had developed over 20 years of fixing systems that were older and more temperamental than this one. He wasn't looking for an error code. He was looking for a break in the rhythm. He noticed the way the generator surged. It wasn't a random spike. It was a shiver, a high-frequency vibration that happened at exactly the same time every time the auxiliary cooling fan cycled. To the software, it looked like a catastrophic power surge, so the safety system would panic and shut the whole unit down to prevent an explosion. The software was doing exactly what it was programmed to do. It was protecting a system that wasn't actually in danger. "Turn on the secondary load," Adrian directed, his voice a low rumble that seemed to harmonize with the machine. The engineers hesitated. "If we add load now, we'll blow the internal breakers." Sophia looked at Adrian. She saw the absolute, unshakable calm in his face. She saw the man who had just told her he'd pick up his daughter at 3 p.m. and that his schedule was more important than her deadline. She realized then that Adrian wasn't afraid of the machine because he wasn't afraid of her. He didn't care about the corporate fallout. He only cared about the physics. "Add the load," Sophia commanded. The technicians complied, flipping the switches for the massive construction cranes and the lighting rigs. The generator roared, the sound changing from a low hum to a desperate metallic scream. The ground beneath their feet began to vibrate. On the monitors, the data lines were turning from green to a pulsing, angry yellow. "It's going to trip," the lead engineer yelled, his fingers blurring across his screen as he tried to force a manual override. "Reset it! Clear the logs! We're going to lose the board!" "Don't touch it," Adrian barked. It was the first time he had raised his voice, and the authority in it was absolute. It was the voice of a man who had stood in the middle of a collapsing power grid and refused to blink. The engineer froze, his hand inches from the reset button. Sophia watched the clock. 5 seconds, 7 seconds, 10 seconds. Usually the system would have gone dark by now. But it was still running. It was screaming. It was shaking, but the lights were still on. Adrian was watching a small auxiliary module tucked behind the main distribution panel, a part of the machine that the diagnostic software supposedly monitored perfectly. He noticed a rhythmic flicker in the status LED of the shifting load sensor. It wasn't a failure code. It was a ghost packet, a signal that was technically within the normal range, but was arriving at the wrong time. The experts had been resetting the system every time they saw the yellow lights, effectively erasing the evidence of the crime before they could solve it. They were so focused on cleaning the logs that they were never letting the machine reach the point where the true cause revealed itself. They were treating the fever, but they were ignoring the infection. "You've been clearing the cache too fast," Adrian said to the room, his voice calm again. "The machine was trying to tell you where it was hurting, but you kept putting a gag in its mouth. You were looking for a broken motor, but you've actually just got a confused sensor." He stepped closer to the panel, his hand resting on the metal housing. He felt the heat, the vibration, and the tension of the current. He realized that the nominal settings of the factory-grade software were too rigid for the thin air and high altitude of the Colorado resort. The system was fighting the environment, not a defect. Sophia stepped closer to him, the wind whipping her hair across her face. She looked at the scuffed toolkit on the ground, and then at the man who was essentially talking to a 100,000-pound block of iron. She felt a surge of a feeling she rarely experienced: humility. She realized that she had been measuring the man by his uniform and the problem by her ego. And she had been wrong about both. When people have tried every standard solution and failed, repeating those steps is just madness disguised as effort. To see something new, you must have the courage to stop fixing and start observing. The most common way to hide a truth is to constantly reset the narrative before it has a chance to finish its story. Knowledge is a fast computer, but wisdom is a slow pair of eyes. The generator continued to roar, a steady but strained sound that filled the snowy valley. The elite team was now silent, their tablets lowered. They were no longer the experts, they were witnesses. Adrian reached into his toolkit, but he didn't pull out a heavy-duty wrench or a high-tech diagnostic probe. He pulled out a simple, old-fashioned analog multimeter, a device that looked like a relic from a 1970s laboratory. "That's not going to read the bus logic," the lead engineer whispered, more out of habit than conviction. "I don't want to read the logic," Adrian replied, his fingers moving over the device's dials with a rhythmic grace. "I want to read the copper. I want to see the raw pulse of the electricity before your software smooths it out for your pretty graphs." Adrian touched the probes to a secondary grounding line tucked behind the main distribution module. He watched the needle on the meter. It was rock steady for exactly 12 seconds. Then it gave a tiny, almost imperceptible jump, a ripple of less than 0.1 volts. "There," Adrian whispered. He pointed to a small auxiliary load sensor, a minor part that wasn't even listed on the primary diagnostic tree. It was a part meant to monitor the power consumption of the site's peripheral security lights. "That part is fine," and the junior engineer argued. "The software marks it as optimal range." "It's fine when the load is stable," Adrian countered, his voice gaining a resonant, authoritative strength. "But when the cranes shift, when the tension changes, the current ripples. Because the sensor is mounted a fraction of an inch too close to the main bus bar, the magnetic field is interfering with the signal. The sensor thinks the load has jumped by 500%. It sends a critical failure packet to the master board, and the master board kills the power to prevent a fire." He looked at Sophia. "The part isn't broken, ma'am. It's just in the wrong place for this kind of current. Your engineers have been replacing the important parts while the unimportant one was causing the crash. You don't need a new generator. You just need a screwdriver and a piece of rubber shielding." The room went deathly silent. The engineers looked at their tablets, then at the sensor, then at each other. They realized that their reliance on the perfect software had made them blind to the physical fact. They were looking for a mountain on their screens, and they had tripped over a pebble in the dirt. For the next 20 minutes, Adrian guided the team through the recalibration. He didn't take over. He acted as a mentor, showing the young techs how to hear the electrical leak. He taught them to look for the almost right, the signals that were technically within safe ranges, but lacked the crispness of a healthy system. They moved the sensor 3/4 of an inch to the left and wrapped the mounting bracket in a specialized thermal shielding tape Adrian had in his bag. When the generator was powered up for the final test of the afternoon, the atmosphere on the site changed. The roar was now a confident, balanced growl. The vibration smoothed out until the puddles of melted snow on the ground were perfectly still. The digital monitors on the engineers' tablets suddenly turned a vibrant, beautiful, healthy green. Load stabilized, systems nominal. Efficiency, 100%. The engineers didn't cheer. They didn't high-five. They simply stood there, deflated by the simplicity of the truth. They had spent 6 hours and thousands of dollars trying to re-engineer a miracle, and a single dad with an old multimeter had fixed it in 20 minutes by knowing where to look. Sophie Lane didn't look at the monitors. She was looking at Adrian. She saw him methodically wiping his tools and placing them back in their designated spots in his toolkit. She saw the grease on his hands and the calm, unburdened look on his face. She realized then that Adrian Cole wasn't the backup. He was the anchor. He was the only person on that entire mountain who knew exactly who he was and what he was worth. "That fixed it," a manager said, his voice hushed with a new kind of reverence. Sophia didn't answer. She stood still, the cold Colorado wind biting at her cheeks. But she didn't feel the cold. She felt a burning, genuine shame for the way she had treated the man standing in front of her. She had tried to command him like a servant, unaware that she was standing in the presence of a master. The most difficult problems in the world are rarely the ones where everything is broken. The real challenges are the things that are nearly correct. The systems that almost work, the plans that are almost solid, the people who are almost seen. We spend our lives looking for a big fix, but we usually lose the race because of a tiny, inconsistent flicker that we decided was too small to matter. Wisdom is the ability to see the giant in the grain of sand. The freeze moment didn't happen when the lights turned green. It happened 5 minutes later, when Adrian Brooks closed his toolkit and began walking toward his old pickup truck. He didn't wait for a "thank you." He didn't ask for a bonus check. He was checking his watch, his focus already shifting back to the life that actually mattered to him. Sophie Lane stood by the workbench, her designer coat discarded, her sleeves rolled up. She had been watching the generator's data stream, which was now a perfectly flat line of stability. She looked at her lead engineers who were now talking in hushed, respectful tones about the Cole calibration. She realized then that her multi-billion-dollar project had been saved by a man she had mocked for his clothes. She realized that her definition of excellence had been a hollow shell. She had built a company on the appearance of speed, while Adrian lived in the reality of precision. "Adrian," Sophia called out. Her voice wasn't a command this time. It was resonant and surprisingly human. Adrian stopped, his hand on the door of his truck. He turned around, offering a polite, neutral nod. "Yes, Miss Lane. Is there a secondary load I missed?" Sophia walked toward him, her heels crunching on the frozen ground. She stopped 3 feet away, effectively breaking the circle of her own elite status. She looked at the truck, and she saw the little girl in the passenger seat, waving a drawing at her. "I misjudged you," Sophia said. The words were short, but they carried a weight that made her board members turn their heads in shock. "I looked at your uniform and I looked at your truck, and I assumed you were just a stopgap. I treated you as if your time was less valuable than mine because you don't have a title in my system." Adrian gave a small, humble shrug. "In a system this big, the labels make it easier to get through the day, ma'am. I don't hold it against you. I was just happy the machine was healthy enough to listen." "Happy to help?" The lead engineer scoffed, though his tone was now one of profound respect. "Adrian, you just saved the project timeline. You just saved every person on this site's job. Why didn't you argue with us earlier? You could have pointed out our mistake an hour ago. Adrian looked at the engineer and then back at Sophia. Because people don't hear you until they need you, sir. That's just the physics of a boardroom. You were too busy being smart to be correct. I learned a long time ago that you can't force logic onto an ego that isn't ready to receive it. It just causes more friction. The site went cold. The project managers looked at their shoes, feeling the weight of their own arrogance. Adrian had just diagnosed the entire corporate culture without raising his voice. You aren't an electrician, Adrian, Sophia said, her eyes searching his for a truth she had missed. No electrician knows the phase-shifting properties of a high-load magnetic bus like that. Who are you, really? Adrian paused, his eyes turning reflective. I'm a dad, Sophia, and right now, I'm a dad who is 5 minutes late for the most important science project demonstration in the county. If the generator is true, I really have to go. He climbed into the truck. The engine roared to life, a healthy, rhythmic sound that matched the generator he had just saved. As he pulled away, leaving the glass and steel resort behind, Sophia realized that Adrian Brooks wasn't poor or unimportant. He was the wealthiest man she had ever met because he knew exactly what was worth his time. In reality, the most impactful people are often the ones who don't need the applause to do the work. They do the work because they value the work itself, not the recognition. The freeze moment isn't just about shock. It's about the uncomfortable clarity that comes when you realize you've been looking at the world through the wrong end of a telescope. Respect isn't a title, it's a realization. The following week, a black luxury SUV pulled up to the curb of the small, modest house where Adrian and Nora lived. A representative from the resort's corporate headquarters stepped out, holding a thick, embossed leather folder. He wasn't there to pay the bill. He was there to offer Adrian the position of Director of Technical Integrity for the entire development group. Adrian sat on his small porch, a cup of coffee in his hand, watching Nora play in the backyard. He looked at the contract, the 7-figure salary, the corporate benefits, the prestigious title that would make him one of the most powerful men in the industry. He looked at the 24/7 availability expectation and the mandatory executive travel clause. He handed the folder back to the representative with a faint, peaceful smile that carried no regret. I truly appreciate the offer, Adrian said, his voice as steady as it had been on the mountain. It's an incredible gesture, but I already have a full-time job, and the CEO is very demanding about her Tuesday tacos. The representative blinked, confused, looking at Adrian's humble surroundings. Mr. Cole, this is a chance for total financial stability for the rest of your life. You'd never have to work a freelance contract again. Why stay here? Adrian looked at Nora, who was currently building a model bridge out of popsicle sticks, laughing as she tried to make it load-bearing. The stability I need isn't in a bank account, sir. It's in the fact that my daughter knows exactly where I'll be at 3 p.m. every single day. I chose the wire because it's a tool for my life, not a cage for my soul. I'll take the contract as a remote consultant, on my own hours from my own city. But I won't trade her childhood for a title on a door. I've already seen the view from the top. It's very cold up there. The representative was stunned into silence. He realized then that Adrian Brooks wasn't ordinary because of his skill. He was extraordinary because of his contentment. He was a man who knew exactly what was enough. The story of the single dad and the billionaire CEO didn't end with a headline, a merger, or a promotion. It ended with a simple Tuesday afternoon. Adrian was back at a different site, fixing a circuit breaker for a local school. Sophie Lane walked by, having traveled down from her tower just to see him work. How's the view from the ground, Adrian? Sophia asked with a wink. Adrian didn't look up from the wiring. He simply tightened a screw, listening for that perfect, rhythmic click. The view is perfect, Sophia, Adrian replied, because from down here, you can actually see the foundation. He realized then that he didn't need to prove himself to anyone. He had found the one system that was perfectly stable. A life lived with integrity and a daughter who thought her dad was a hero. Value isn't something you demand with a title. It's something you provide with your presence. The strongest buildings aren't the ones with the best views. They are the ones with the most honest foundations. Never judge a person by the role they play. Judge them by the character they carry within it. True success is knowing when you have enough, and true power is the courage to stay true to what matters most. True excellence does not need an audience to exist. Never underestimate the quietest person in the room. They might be the only one with the integrity to hold the entire foundation together. Titles are temporary, but character is the only asset that never loses its value. If you believe that real skill shows in results, subscribe for more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, would you have trusted a man like Adrian at first glance, or would you have looked at his clothes?